Alright, so we are now on the tail end of the F-14, and I was just playing with installing the pipe and making sure that everything fits. But one thing I want to mention here is that the pipes in this jet are definitely directional. So if you look at this pipe, you can see that it actually kind of kinks one way or the other. It's not straight, and that is intentional so that it vectors the thrust coming out of the back towards the CG of the plane. So you want the thrust coming out to be sort of angled outwards, and so the opposing force, it's pushing the jet towards the CG itself. And so when you're installing this, that is key. The second thing is that you have this marker here, and when you install this in there, this marker wants to sit like so. So you can see that with that actually hitting the back of this, that actually sets the spacing in here. And so what I'm going to be using is, if it hits exactly, you can see that the pipe kind of sits really quite at the edge. What I want to do is move it a little bit forward, just like that, so there's a bit of a gap, and that's so that if the owner wants to put afterburner lights in there, they have like room to actually shine. The other thing I want to point out is that I did 2 coats of BVM heat shield on the inside of this, and for the most part this is the part that I want to protect right here, because the pipe's going to be recessed. The other part that I want to mention is so when the pipe goes in, it goes in from the back, sort of like that, and then gets secured to the mounting rails inside the jet. And then once those are done, remember this has to angle a particular way, and the cones that go in here, these guys will only fit one way to make sure that this tube is aligned correctly. And once that's done, the cone goes in place, and then everything happens up front. So right now I'm waiting for brackets for my KingTech 160 engines that are going to go inside the jet. So there's not much I can do, but I will mention that I touched up the red. So I touched up the red on the air brakes here, and also on the top side, and the white on the gear doors, so that's looking good. So we'll see you in a little bit once I actually get to mount the engines. It looks like it's going to be pretty straightforward. The wiring is there, everything's just waiting for the engines to be put in place. So I want to talk about how this pipe is going to get secured in the jet. So here is one of the rails. This is the removable one, and what's going to happen is that this is where the front of the jet sits, this is where the back of the jet sits. And what I'm finding is that the way this is going to sit is, remember that this needs to cant outwards, so it's going to sit something like that, but not quite far back. So it's probably going to sit the way I want, probably like right around there. So it's going to leave maybe like you know, half a centimeter, so about 5 millimeters, maybe 10 millimeters out. So something close to, let's see if I can, yeah, so it's gonna sit in the jet about like that. So there's gonna be a little bit of a thread on the front, and this is where I'm going to tie it down. So the other one's gonna sit opposite this guy right under here, and that's what it's gonna look like. So this will give me about the right measurement coming out the back of the jet, so that from, you know, the end of the pipe to like the lip of the tail cone, we have, I don't know, 5 millimeters or something like that, just enough room so that if we added lights in here, they can shine. But that's essentially what that's gonna look like. So what I've decided to do is, you can see that I secured this machine screw here with two nuts, and that's so that it can't get loose. So that's going to sit there, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what the spacing on the pipe needs to be, because remember, this is gonna sit somewhere like that in the jet. And so what I need is to put this lock nut in here at the right spot so that when I put another lock nut on the front end, it gets jammed in place, and that's how it's gonna get held in place. So it's probably gonna be something that looks like that. And we're gonna have another lock nut go on the front here, but I need to figure out what that adjustment needs to be so that I can secure this correctly. But this is what you're looking at essentially on both sides, the inside and on the outside, and this is the pipe that's on the left. So we'll get that done and we'll show you the results. So I've measured this in the plane, and what I've found, I think, is if I put this lock nut about 9 millimeters away or in from the tip of the screw that secures it, that gets the pipe to sit exactly where I want. So I'm going to do this on both sides, and then now with that measurement, the pipe will just sit like that all the way back up against that and get secured in place, and I should have the correct distance on the back, and then I need to figure out obviously the turbine mounting distance. Okay, so what I'm going to show here is how the pipes are mounted. So if we look at the fixed rail, which is what is shown here, you can see that I put I believe that is a M3 screw or bolt, and it goes from the back, and it's about 40 millimeters long. And what I did is right on the bulkhead I put 2 screws because I want that secured to the bulkhead, and then the lock nut right there is what I use to determine the depth of the pipe, and by that I mean how much the pipe will stick out back outside of the tail cone. So I set that by playing around and figuring out where I want the pipe to be, and I'll show you. What I also did is that where the 2 hex nuts are, where the screw attaches to the wooden rail, I put CA there so that those stay in place. It can still be removed, but you'll have to use a lot of force, and the idea is that what I want to do is once the pipe sits on this screw, I want to be able to put another lock nut on the front to secure it in place, and I'll show you what I mean by that shortly. See how the pipe now sits, and pushed as far back as possible, it will sit on those hex lock nuts that were on the back, and I'm just going to add 2 more hex lock nuts to lock the pipe in place. And so now you can see the 2 lock nuts that secure the pipe in place, and this is why I needed to glue the nuts that hold those screws in place, because once I put those lock nuts from this perspective, there's no way for me to get behind with the pipe in place to actually put a driver on the bolt to secure it, so I can screw those lock nuts on. This is what we have here, and that pipe cannot move. It can only move up and down, but left to right is fixed, and it cannot come in and out. So we're going to install the tail cone and just see what that looks like. Installing the tail cone, these are the markers you're looking for. So there's a tiny hole on there, and when you look at the tail cone, there's also a tiny hole right up in here where my index finger is, and those need to match up, otherwise you're not using the correct cone because these pipes are directional. Okay, so lining everything up. There we go. And so this tail cone rotates sort of clockwise, and the opposing tail cone rotates counterclockwise. And you can see now that we have a fairly even gap all around, and that was the same process I used to mount the second tail cone, and now both tail cones are in place. And if I were able to show you, you'd see that that tiny hole that was up top here, it lines up between the bulkhead on the fuselage and the bulkhead that's in the tail cone for both sides. Again, I'm going to mention this. It's important that the tail cones are installed correctly. They only fit one way. I'd say like 8 o'clock-ish downwards on the left side and about 4 o'clock-ish downwards on the right side. And that's intentional. Let's go to these screws right here. So these are the screws that hold the rail in place, and what I'm using are these RTL fasteners, number 3 by 5/8. So those are fairly long, you can see, and they got a pretty good thread, and I think they're the perfect screw for the job. So nice and long, you can see that, and that's what's gonna go into here to secure the rail in place. So this is the same setup on the other side. The other thing I want to mention is just you can see that I have some markings in here, and what these are markings for where the turbine is going to sit roughly, and that's based on about a 0.75 inch gap between the end of the turbine cone and the start of the pipe. And so now we're getting ready to install the turbine, and one of the things I want to mention is adjustability. So what I've done here is there's two things you want to keep in mind, or at least I kept in mind when I was installing this turbine. One is the difficulty of screwing the turbine in place. What I mean by that is once this turbine is sitting on the rails, you have this curve here, which means if you mount your brackets too far into the jet, you can't really reach that screw comfortably. But also you can't mount it too far forward because there's a limit on the turbine where that bracket can go. So what I decided to do is thread the lines in between. So what I mean by that is I want maximum adjustability. So depending on, based on how I mounted the pipes, I know that I want about a 0.75 inch, 3/4 inch gap between the end of the pipe, the end of the turbine here and the pipe, so about that much. And because the pipe is adjustable, it can move back and forth a little bit, maybe 1/4 inch or something like that. And the turbine is also adjustable. What I decided to do is mount the bracket right in the middle and place the turbine such that I have about maybe 1/4 inch of play forward and maybe 1/4 inch of play backward. So basically this much amount between the bracket here and the turbine, so the turbine can actually slide back and forth if needed for final adjustment. So that's what I'm doing here. And to install this, I have KingTech 160s. The process is fairly easy. So I just basically get the turbine in place all the way in the bottom here. And miss the pipe, and then so it's sitting on the bottom like that. Then I sort of move it forward, get the back of the turbine exhaust cone into the pipe, and then just gently maneuver the turbine into place. It's a bit of a workout, but it goes into place really nicely, just like that. So you just need to move things around, but it's doable. And just like that, the turbine is installed. And so it's going to sit, like I said, those markings which tell me roughly where the turbine is supposed to go. I'm going to add a few markings that go from sort of like right down the rail. What happens is between measuring the size of the turbine, the size of the clamps, and this opening here, I think if I draw a line 6 millimeters from the edge here in, so a line straight down, that's 6 millimeters away from each edge, that lines up exactly with the hole. So essentially where those lines meet these two is where I want to mount, or at least consider that as a starting point. Go to the back of the turbine, check, and make sure that everything is centered, and then we can drill our holes. But you can see that with this positioning, this hole is not very difficult to get to. It still requires a little bit of finagling, but I can get to all 4 holes. And if the turbine needs to be adjusted, well, we have a little bit of wiggle room. So you can see we have some room between the FOD screen and the bulkhead and so that turbine can sort of move forward a little bit more, or it can move back a little bit more by just taking off and shifting the turbine within the so to mount this turbine, I'm going to be using this set of screws, which is the M4 by 20. They have a pretty aggressive thread and should work just fine. So that's what I'm going to use. I want to drill the hole slightly smaller than that, and then this will create the threads in there. We're going to drop CA into those holes just to form up the wood and the threads there, and we're going to secure this down. So the turbine has been mounted, and you can see those markings came in pretty handy and fell pretty much where I expected them to go. I have secured the removable rail with the RTL fastened screws. You can see them there. From the back, you can see that here's a shot from the back, and the turbine is perfectly centered in there. So, job well done. I forgot to mention, which is that you can see that some of the landing gear airlines are gonna interact with the FOD screen, and so because I'm gonna prevent chafing, I added this protection here, and so that's what that is that over time, even if the airlines rub on that FOD screen, they're going to be protected by that PTFE sheathing over there. And so I'm going to do this on both sides of the jet. Just some of the things that I try to keep in mind when I'm building jets. And alright, so we're getting ready to test our engines. On the deck right now we have the number one engine, which is the engine on the right, which is this guy. We're gonna get started. I have my fire extinguisher. It has been primed. All the functions have been tested. They've checked out. We have fuel. So let's get to it. Number one or right engine checks out. Now we're gonna go try and run engine number 2. See what happens. Hopefully it's also a no drama run. So I don't see any fuel leaks. The UATs are still full. Let me see if I can show that real quick. So you can see that the UATs there are pretty full. That's the one for the right engine. No bubbles. There are no leaks that I can see, no fuel drops. So that's good. So we're gonna let this engine cool, and then we're gonna switch over and run engine number 2. I did check for temps. This area right here is getting a little bit warm, but not, I can still put my hand on it. It got up to about 46 degrees Celsius, so thereabout. So that's not too bad, keeping in mind that at this point in time there is no airflow. But when the jet's moving, there's going to be a lot of air that's coming in and flowing over the turbine, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now we've switched GSUs and we're looking at the one that's plugged into engine number 2, which is the engine on the left. So we've primed the pump, everything looks good. UAT looks pretty good. There are no bubbles, there are no leaks in here. UAT looks good, there are no bubbles, there are no leaks, as you can see, nice and full of fuel, same as the one we just ran. No bubbles, so that's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and run engine number 2. Alright, here we go.
Ignition on.
You can see right there that we are idle. So let's run it up. I'm gonna move over to the other side just so I can keep an eye out from that side. We've tested that both engines start on their own. The last test for the day is to make sure that both actually start together. So you can see we have our left engine here, and that's the cable going to it, and then our right engine on. And right now all I have is 2S and Spectrum turbine battery on each side. So whereas this is not going to be the final setup, this is good to just test and make sure all the stuff works. And then we are using a TDR-18, and the throttles at the moment are just wired, and you can see them right here. So here's throttle 1, and here is throttle number 2. So pretty simple test. We just want to fire up both engines and see that everything starts and runs correctly.
Ignition on.